This is America, where it's getting harder for recent college graduates to find a job. Hiring uncertainty driven by tariffs, the war with Iran, and how AI could replace jobs. I'll have more on that coming up, but for now, it's over to Rob Matheson in our DC studio.
Thanks, Kristen. Now, millions of workers in the U.S. are struggling to get a job. On paper, it shouldn't be like this. The U.S. economy is pretty healthy. Corporate profits are broadly up. Unemployment hovers around 4.3%. There were 115,000 new non-farming jobs added in the U.S. in April, and that was driven by the healthcare sector, which added 37,000 additional posts. Transportation and warehousing increased by 30,000, while the retail sector added 22,000 positions. Well, the U.S. Labor Secretary, all is well in the job market, and the job seekers don't need to fear AI.
This is the second month in a row that President Trump's economy has beaten job expectations. But in the AI space, what we're seeing is a continued excitement for these investments. But more importantly, our job at the Department of Labor is to make sure that the current workforce and future generations of workers have those AI literacy skills so they can use these tools and without the fear of job displacement. And what we truly believe at the end of the day, we're going to just see work changing, not necessarily these jobs completely being eliminated.
So what is the problem? Is it AI? Is it more companies tightening the bottom line? Or is it the workforce itself that's changing? Kristen Sulumi's got more on the confusing reality of the U.S. job market.
U.S. markets here on Wall Street hit record highs this year, while unemployment rates remain relatively low at 4.3%, both signs of a relatively stable job market. But the unemployment rate for recent college graduates has hit 5.6%. And if you look, everywhere there are signs of a changing economy. Consider recent layoffs in the tech and finance sectors. Oracle announced it was eliminating 30,000 positions this year. Amazon, 16,000 positions. Meta, about 8,000. And those were once considered top fields. Other employers are holding off on hiring due to uncertainties over tariffs, war in the Middle East, and uncertainties over artificial intelligence.
We do not know for us how it will impact, because people do still want human interaction and not to speak to a robot, but that could affect a lot of fields, especially IT.
I'm in forensic psychology, so you can't AI that, as it turns out. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not a big fan, but I see it serves some purposes, and I think it's useful for certain things.
One reason the unemployment rate isn't higher is that fewer people are working or even looking for work. Aging demographics, a lower birth rate, and less immigration, all contributing to a shrinking labor force participation rate.
Yeah, the labor market's obviously quite tight at the moment. We all need to evolve and make sure we become more relevant to the issues of today. And if that happens, then I'm not worried about it.
One job sector that is growing with the aging population, healthcare. But more women than men enter that field, while male-dominated fields like transportation and manufacturing have been losing jobs. According to the Labor Department, 1 out of 3 men in the United States aren't working or even looking for a job.
Well, the number of men in the workforce is the lowest it's been since 1948. That's not including the pandemic. There are 3 key factors that seem to be driving that. Millions of baby boomers are hitting retirement age, or they're retiring early because their long-term investments are paid off. More younger men are choosing to continue to study rather than get a full-time job. And there's a growing number of men who can't work because they've got health issues or they've got disabilities. Now, we're joined by Jeff Strohl, research professor and director of the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce, and by Stan Voygur, Senior Fellow in Economic Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Thank you both, gentlemen, for coming and being with us on Al Jazeera. Stan, I want to start with you first of all. In terms of the impact, there was the changes that we're seeing within the workplace and in the workforce as well. What kind of impact do you think this is having on American families?
I think the biggest thing we've seen over the past 2-3 years is a situation where the unemployment rate is quite low, but there's also very little hiring. And so I think that is what's currently the most pressing issues for American families, especially when a member of the household loses a job. I think that's the right now the biggest issue. In the somewhat longer run, some of the trends we discussed where men are less likely to be in the labor force, less likely to work, I think that's become quite salient. Of course, on the flip side, women are more likely to work than ever before. And in fact, I think if you add it all together, labor force participation for sort of people of working age is actually at historical highs. And so part of it is really a shift of male employment towards female employment, with men doing more care work, which is, I think, a good reason not to be in the labor force. At the same time, you see certain groups of men who have left the labor force maybe because they have a criminal record, which makes it harder to find work. Maybe they have a disability or in very ill health. Maybe they have a drug addiction. And so, I think it's a mixed bag. Some of these broad trends happen in part for good reasons, in part for bad reasons.
Jeff, I've seen reports that people have been putting it down to the influx of AI and technological advancement, but also the impact of on the economy of the tariffs, for example. Is this something that has been fairly sudden for America, or do you think this has been building for a while and the trends have been there and people are just seeing the end results of those now?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think we have a bunch of confounding factors. We've had a number of shocks, so tariffs, of course, are a shock. I think the storytelling that we're hearing on AI right now makes it seem as though it's a shock. Clearly, ChatGPT, what was first introduced in 2022, I'm not certain that we've really seen a demonstrable workplace impact of AI, but what we have seen are sectorial investment shifting. So if you take a look at what Meta has said in its press releases, it's not that it is making layoffs because AI is replacing the workers, it's because they want to move money from one sector to another, in particular out of their metaverse. Things with UPS, they've made layoffs because they've actually stopped carrying Amazon goods, but all the tech bros really want us to believe it's all because of AI. And so there are shocks, there is change coming, but it's pretty hard to unravel it. And I think, as Stan had mentioned, the labor market is frozen. So right now, the amount of economic uncertainty that is in the market right now makes it so people don't know what to do next. High interest rates also play in because you can't sell your house and go buy a new one. So there's a bunch of confounding factors. And I think they've somewhat split between shocks and having been building slowly.
I want to talk. Sorry, Stan, go ahead.
I totally agree with Jeff. I think the impact of AI is really quite overrated. I think for the short-term changes where there's this frozen labor market, maybe it plays a part. That some businesses are not sure who to hire. But I think Jeff mentioned tariffs. I think those play a big role. In general, policy uncertainty around what's the government going to do next that's going to affect my business plays a big role. I also think we have to recognize we've now been in an environment with very high interest rates for a few years. And I think all those factors explain this static labor market that we're in. I don't think we have to point to AI for that. Then, somewhat separately, somewhat more slowly moving, we have these sectoral shifts, manufacturing down, healthcare up, that also have nothing to do with AI. And so I think a lot of what we see in the labor market is driven by other factors. Of course, AI is a big phenomenon, super important on the capital expenditure side. And we now do see some occupations where it's been having an impact. Software engineering maybe is the first one. One thing I'll say about software engineering, I think if you'd asked people 2 years ago, where is AI, where's ChatGPT going to have its first impact, people would have pointed toward jobs that involve a lot of writing. They would not have pointed to jobs that involve a lot of coding. I think that was basically unpredictable. I don't think anyone got that right. And I think that's important to keep in mind as we think about where we're going moving forward.
I want to pick up on what you both mentioned, which is the healthcare sector. And it has been offsetting kind of flatter job performance, which we've seen across other parts of the economy. It accounted for around 2/3 of all new jobs in the past year, but the demand is hugely outpacing supply. The Bureau of Health Workforce predicts that by 2038, there's going to be an 11% shortage of registered nurses in non-metropolitan areas. Now, that's equivalent to about 100,000 positions. It's going to be harder for people living in those same areas to get access to care, with projections there's going to be a 39% shortage of primary care physicians. And if you need a dentist, it's going to be even worse, with a projected shortage of about 46% in non-metropolitan areas. So here we have this kind of slight paradox, don't we? Because on the one hand, Healthcare seems to be an area which is booming, but on the other hand, it seems to be hemorrhaging jobs. Jeff, just talk us through what your assessment
I would think
is.
that one of the pieces that we have when we're thinking about the healthcare workforce is that it takes a lot of time to get prepped up. So I think that is a big factor. And with the demographic wave, the graying of the U.S. population, we've seen just disproportionate increases in demand for healthcare. So the demand for healthcare and demand for associated services, they've been growing quite quickly with the baby boom population, which actually had two peaks to it. And so we're now getting both of them into the retired portion of the labor market. So along with the training, it takes a lot of work to train and a big requirement. And we're also talking about often a female-dominated occupations with lower wage structure. So not talking about practitioners, but actually talking about healthcare support. There's not necessarily the wage pull aspects of it. So it's not really clear that wages have caught up with that demand, with that supply shortfall.
Stan, also, I was wondering whether or not one element might be the fact that given the nature of the economy, that people are more intent on staying in the job that they've got, that they're gripping hold of that job as hard as they can, because it used to be that we would see a greater fluidity amongst people moving for jobs and so on when the economy was stronger. Do you think that that is a factor in playing into this? People just aren't moving?
Yeah, I think given how low the hiring rate is, I think it's wise for people not to quit their jobs right now. I think it's much harder to find a new job now than it was even 4 years ago. I think the hiring rate is, it's not quite as low as it was during the financial crisis, but it's not that much higher either. And so that's absolutely going to be a factor.
Do you think, Jeff, that the companies are shifting their emphasis from those who went through college degree programs to those who are with more practical skills, who have worked through an apprenticeship system? Is there an adaptation that the companies are going through there?
Well, I think there's a lot of discussion about this, but it's not really clear if removing degree requirements, for instance, has had as much impact as the proponents would like to see. 1 in 700 jobs have been filled under these new, what we call skills-based or skills-forward hiring. So there's a desire to look for the technical, but the U.S. labor market really works with a combination of general and specific skills. So we have this almost schizophrenic approach where on one hand we want to have people with more technical skills coming in, but on the other hand, the CEO and the shop foreman want somebody with general skills because it imbues a sense of flexibility to meet change that we can't meet as well with our education system. So you want people to be able to think on the job, and that comes a lot with general education. But yes, we are moving towards people wanting more specific, but we'll have to see where it heads to. I'm not sure that the apprenticeship side will carry over because you're talking about what's commonly in skilled trades, which is a small share, important but small share of total employment.
That's right. I think if you look at the labor market as a whole, it's still the case that workers with a college degree have higher wages, more likely to be employed than workers without, and that's true both for people in their 50s, and it's also true for people in their 20s.
I want to pick up on something that our reporter Kristen pointed out in her package there. The amount of job losses, job reductions we've seen in the tech sector, and I believe you both referred to it. Is there a risk rather that they are, given the fact that AI is essentially still a very new technology, that they're kind of betting on the hope that AI is going to be able to do these jobs, only to find that that's actually going to be a risk longer term and that they're going to end up having to rehire people in the future when the AI doesn't quite match the requirements they've got? Stan?
My sense is that a number of those firms simply hired too many people when the labor market was really hot. They were worried to let people go when it was very difficult to find workers in 2021, 2022, and I think those are the workers that they are laying off now. And I think, but maybe I'm wrong about this. I think that in part what they're doing is they're using talk about AI as cover for layoffs that they were going to do anyway. Because of course, if you're talking to your shareholders, it sounds a lot better to say, look, we don't need all these workers anymore because we're implementing these new technologies that are doing the work for them than if you tell them, look, we hired way too many people in 2021. So we paid them for no reason for 4 years.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of what's going on.
But also on this, we have to note that people, I think, are mistaking AI as total replacement of an occupation rather than at the task level. So if we look at the hype that came in under automation, we had the same phenomenon, that automation was going to wipe out 40 million American jobs. And the actual estimates declined significantly because it was understood that automation was in fact impacting just one of the tasks that somebody does on the job. So for instance, with banking, with the introduction of automatic tellers, people thought employment would go down. Employment actually went up. So there's either a complementarity with the new technology or a substitution. And right now, I don't think we know enough about AI, which way it's going to go. And there's enough evidence that even in programming, that AI is a complement and could actually help grow in the long run. Yes, we're going to have a structural shock, but is that going to last? That's the hard question.
Jeff, sorry, Stan, but I just want to pick up on Jeff's expertise in terms of education here. How difficult is it, do you think, for colleges and universities and schools to be able to prepare students for this new environment that they're moving into with all the changes? Not just giving them the academic or qualifications they need, but actually trying to create an environment and an attitude to the way that the workplace is going to treat them?
That's a very good question. My sense of this is that the traditional post-secondary education gives us a foundation. So when we meet the labor market, if the labor market is changing at a much faster rate than the academic institutions are able to redevelop curriculum, hire faculty, they're going to do a poor job. But we have to remember what has made the U.S. economy work, which is that foundation of general skills so that you can deal with the unknown. So we need to focus on AI literacy and functionality, but we're not going to be able to keep up with chat GDP 27, 28, 29, 30, but we can give the base skills. So I started programming in 1976. The tools that I got in flow charting still help me today in understanding how to program. The universities hopefully can do the same thing with AI literacy and then ultimately functionality.
I think from what you're both saying, it's clear that nevertheless students that are graduating now are facing some of the toughest challenges in the workplace that people have faced for many years, and Heidi Jo Castro has been meeting one of them.
Eric, buen dia.
This was the moment that 22-year-old Eric Buendia and his family have been striving for all their lives. His parents immigrated from Bolivia in the 90s, and now he's the first from his family to graduate from college.
They were cheering, they were really happy. They were just like screaming my name. They were so I don't know, I just felt that they were proud.
That was last week. Now, Buendia is deep into a job search that's not going well, despite his degree from the prestigious Wesleyan University.
How many jobs have you applied for?
I don't even know. I might have applied to over 50 by now, maybe more.
And you've heard back from how many?
Like 1 or 2.
He's not alone. The unemployment rate for recent college graduates in the U.S. is 5.6%, well above the 4.2% for adults overall. And nearly half of recent grads are underemployed or working jobs that don't require a college education, the highest share since 2020. Buendia studied film and hopes to break into journalism or cinematography. He says if he doesn't find a job soon, he'll likely go to graduate school.
Younger Americans appear to be losing confidence in the job market. A recent Gallup poll found that less than half of job seekers under age 35 believe it's a good time to find a job. And they're competing not just with each other, but with AI.
I think it's reducing jobs. And I also have a fear that hiring managers are using AI to sift through resumes instead of looking through them themselves.
Anthony Featherstone leads WorkSource Montgomery, a Maryland agency that helps job seekers. He says AI has both replaced some entry-level jobs and enabled fiercer competition for remaining positions.
So you just graduated and looking for your first job. That may not necessarily set you apart right now because AI has allowed us all to be more effective in our job search preparation.
Okay, 2 p.m. Saturday sounds good.
In Buendia's case, he knows making himself stand out requires making many calls and meeting potential employers face-to-face. And while waiting for a job offer is a frustrating process, he's supported by his family, who say they're proud of what he's already achieved. Heidi Jo Castro, Al Jazeera, Alexandria, Virginia.
Now, you were both talking about the impact of AI, and you said that it was yet to be decided and ascertained really what that impact is going to be. And we are, of course, at the early stages of that. At the same time, there are students who are leaving university and college, and they have high expectations because that's the way that they're trained through school and college to expect the very best and the very highest jobs. Do you think that we're reaching a point where, Stan, do you think that both companies but also education establishments need to kind of reassess those expectations that the students may have when they go through school?
No, I think the expectations those students have who just graduated from college are reasonable. I think the U.S. government has made incredible policy mistakes over the past year and a half, but even years before that. As a result, we now have massive uncertainty for businesses, because of the tariffs, because of dramatic changes to immigration policy. We have very high interest rates because the Trump administration, before that the Biden administration, engaged in fiscal policy that was way too loose. Right? We're still running a 6.5% budget deficit, even though the unemployment rate is quite low. And so I think it's reasonable to be frustrated about those policy mistakes because they've made the labor market much worse than it should be. Also, to be honest, it really goes to show how mistaken the people were who thought that all this protectionism, all the anti-immigration policies, who thought that would strengthen the labor market. Right? Everything it's done so far is weaken the labor market for native-born Americans.
Jeff, we're talking about students and young people. What is the impact, do you think, on mid-career workers or older workers who are trying to get back into the workforce?
Well, one of the things that we haven't talked about is the overall impact of reduction in force and the pulling back on federal grants that really impact the research facilities. So normally in the United States, we dump 3 million so graduates into the labor market in a single month in May. And it takes about 7 to 9 months for the economy to absorb those and unemployment to drop back down. Now we have added reduction in force plus grants, which is really hitting the mid-skilled workers an awful lot. And so our expectation is it's really going to take the U.S. economy about 18 months to absorb with a new cohort of college graduates coming in. So this is going to ripple up to the mid-career worker. So we've got these things that are freezing the labor market. So if we look back to the Great Recession, we have similar pieces. One, the housing market crunched. Now we have high interest rates. So there's an impact that's holding people geographically stable so they can't move from New York to San Francisco as easily to get a job, which is one of the things people in their mid-career do, right? When a good job comes up, they move. And these things are holding back. So the whole supply side, people getting dumped in the labor market, both impacts the young graduate, but I can suspect it's going to be impacting the others because of freezing up. Nobody wants to leave their job because they don't know where the next one is. And if you're older in your career and you want to make a change, it's tough.
Stan, we've got about a minute left, so I just want to, for the last one, are we going through just a period of readjustment and things might go back to something similar to what the way they were before, or is this how things are going to be now?
If I had to bet, I would say it's the former, but it's extremely difficult to predict. As we discussed earlier, 2 years ago, no one would have thought that software engineering would be the job that would be affected the most by AI, and now it turns out it was. And so I think it's just very difficult to say.
Jeff, very briefly, only about 30 seconds, do you think that this is how the market's going to be now?
No, I think we're going through a structural change and things will be different. But right now, people are acting like change has never occurred. Change is always occurring. And so I can't see to the other side of the divide, but I'm not certain it's a structural change as some people might believe.
Everyone used to be a farmer,
Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. It's going to be interesting to see how this is going to play out in the run-up to the midterms, of course, back in November. I want to thank Jeff Strohl, Research Professor and Director at the Georgetown University Center on Education and the Workforce, and Stan Voygur, Senior Fellow in Economic Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And that is all from the team here in Washington. We're going to hand you back to Kristen and Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha.
Thanks, Rob. On the next This Is America, we look at whether or not the United States is prepared for its next major public health emergency. That, as millions of visitors are about to descend on the country for the FIFA World Cup. That story on Tuesday, 18:30 GMT or 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time here in the United States. That's all for now. Thank you for watching.